Alex Miller, welcome to the RevAmp podcast. We're here and we are absolutely delighted to have you on the show today. For those people at home who haven't had the pleasure of meeting you before, can you just take a moment or two to introduce yourself, your role, and a little bit about your company?
Yeah, thanks. First off, thanks again for having me on. Super excited to be here. But hey, everyone, I'm Alex Miller, Director of Revenue Operations at Sendoso. For those of you who maybe have heard of Sendoso, what we do is we help companies engage, convert, retain customers with strategic sending and gifting. So lots of fun things that come from direct mail, gifting, swag, all that fun stuff. We have at Sendoso just over 400 employees at the company, mostly based in the Bay Area. And then we also have a big office out in Scottsdale, Arizona. I'm based in San Francisco. In my role though, at Sendoso, looking after revenue operations, I look after all ops from everything from sales development, so super top of funnel, our first conversations with our prospects, all the way through sales, account management, customer success. So everything from very top of funnel through very bottom of funnel. And I've been with the company for just a little under 2 years now. So really excited to be here, chat through more things.
Fantastic. And Alex, in my research, I found out that not only are you an avid RevOps professional, but you're also equally a passionate skier. What's next on your horizon? Where do you want to travel next to go to?
Yeah, so 2020 was fascinating in that the one trips that we were able to somehow pull off was to go skiing. I think what a more perfect socially distant activity than to be up on a mountain. So I'm living in San Francisco. The Lake Tahoe is kind of my home base, but a trip I'm really excited about taking hopefully in the next year or so is a trip to Japan to go skiing up there. So lots of planning that goes into that, and more excited to travel now than really ever before. So it's hard to believe it's already almost summertime and ski season's over, but always looking forward to the next one.
Fantastic, Alex. So today's subject and topic that we're going to dig into is around tooling. And of course, from what I understand from you, you're very much not only strategic, but also hands-on, that you have that first-hand experience of perhaps selecting, deploying, connecting the tools. And you guys at Sendoso pride yourself on having like a deep and expansive stack of technology. Maybe if we start at the top of the funnel, what are the first steps in kind of choosing the right tools for you? Where's your mindset and your prioritization at?
Yeah, good question. And part of the unique part about how we've built our RevOps team is we don't have specialists just yet. I think what we've done is we've hired a really strong group of generalists who can administer tools, can think strategically, can implement, can help troubleshoot issues with end users. So it can really own kind of not just setting up the tools, evaluating the tools, but also making sure the data is flowing right. And ultimately, if there's any type of decision support that comes out of the tools, like we have a really scrappy group of operators who keep the lights on for everybody. But when we go about evaluating tools, it's an interesting position that we find ourselves in, being within the MarTech space, because we have other tools that our own product integrates with. We have a lot of tools that we are customers of that are also customers of ours. So we tend to have a really close partnership with a lot of other tools within the sales and marketing space, which has lent ourselves to having a fairly, I'm not going to say heavy stack, but a fairly robust stack. Mm-hmm. And one of the main things when we look at bringing a new tool aboard is just hey, what is the value that we intend to bring to our teams? What is the administrative burden on that tool? So making sure that we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot by bringing on this tool and not having the right resourcing internally to support it. But a lot of it's, our team works really closely with, everyone from our SDRs to our account executives, to our CSMs, to our account managers. A lot of us actually used to do those roles ourselves. So like, we really understand like, what is a day in the life of an SDR, and what are the parts of their life that we can probably automate or make a little cleaner and more efficient for them. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes when we're looking at tools, it's just scoping out like, hey, what is the impact we're trying to make in our teams that are going to be using the tools day to day. And then when I like to evaluate vendors, a lot of it's going out into the communities and like chatting with my peers. I mean, there's great tools out there, services like G2, you can go, services that will do interviews with current customers and kind of report back to you. But I love chatting with other RevOps professionals. I think like I'm no stranger to like sending someone at another company a cold email and saying, hey, I saw that you're on so-and-so's website. I'd love to just chat with you for 10 minutes if you got it around how your experience using this tool. And, one of the perks of working at Sendoso is we could always send a nice thank you as a response to that. Won't call it a lead gen tool because I don't get paid for that, but it is a fun part of the job. But definitely. I think when we evaluate tools, it's a lot of like social validation. Thinking around like, hey, what are our peers doing? What are other companies that have solved this problem doing? That's usually the starting point for approaching vendors and having the conversations with them around here's our challenges. Can you talk through how your solution can help us with that? And then if we go through implementation and evaluation, a lot of it's fairly hands-on. We like to pull in like a small test group for most tools we bring on board, so we can have early validation that before we roll it out to a team of 30 SDRs, we can test something with a small group and make sure that we fine tune it before we bring it out to a broader team. But there's so many different types of tools out there in the MarTech landscape these days that anything from data providers to sales engagement platforms to CPQ tools to data providers, enrichment vendors. It's really understanding, saying, hey, what is the business impact we're trying to make by either looking at a vendor or no vendor. Sometimes it's a matter of we need to go retool a process. But I think the take home there is, as much as we can involve end users in our own company, we try to, and as much as we can validate that the solution's the right fit for us by talking to peers. That's what so it makes me sleep a little bit better at night, knowing that, hey, someone in another company I really respect and knows this role has gone through the gauntlet to evaluate a tool and bring it on board for their company.
So you've hinted at something here, Alex, but you haven't said it explicitly. I've heard in the last 12 months, for example, some kind of CFOs talking about consolidating spend and connecting the stack. Mm-hmm. It feels like the mindset of the leadership that you work with has been more about making the investment with an eye to maybe the impact and not managing the budget maybe as the primary motive for a decision. Help me to understand the kind of the mindset, the leadership mindset that's empowering that tool selection, because I think you've hinted at it and it's an important clue right there. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think when we evaluate tools, like I said, we're a company that our very founding ethos as a company, our two co-founders were sales professionals before they became co-founders. So like we have a lot of go-to-market DNA at the highest levels of our company. And I think that's something that, at least from companies I've worked at, is super unique. And it's what gets me fired up to come to work every day, because from the very top down, it's a very go-to-market centric mindset leadership team. Mm-hmm. And therefore, when we're looking at vendors, like I think you definitely want to be cost conscious to an extent. And I think for us, we're an experimental company. Like we're down to try new things. If there's a new vendor out there that does something unique, like, we'll give it a try. And I think a lot of, some companies that maybe I've worked at previously, or other companies out there, like maybe too conservative, especially in times like we're in today, where it's like, hey, we're tightening the purse strings a bit, and maybe we don't want to try making, bigger investments or buy tools that we, frankly, maybe we're stretching on. Mm-hmm. But we've taken a different approach then. I think being experimental and trying new things is actually what's kind of got us to where we are today. Mm-hmm. Like our co-founders, when they started Sendoso, like that was an experimental project. Like what happens if you send someone a Starbucks gift card before a meeting? Do you think they're going to show up and have a more engaged meeting? Like, and the truth is they have. So, to answer your question more explicitly, like we look out at vendors, like, we're definitely cost conscious. And like I said, a lot of that social validation that goes to say, hey, like this is the right vendor for us. And even if there's some uncertainties around this is what they do, we're still trying to develop that part of our business, but here's a tool that might help us get there, goes a long way. And I think, like I said, we're fortunate enough to have an exec team that, forces us, or at least pushes us to think outside the box. And, we like to think that we, in the sending category that we're in today, like there's not a lot of our customers have done, sending and gifting, with a tool before. So a lot of the tools that a lot of our customers and prospects come to us are looking to do something for the first time. So, it's part of our ethos to be curious and try something new and just be experimental, frankly.
So I get all of that, and that's great. But how you gave me, I think, a prior example before this, whereby I think it was an ABM solution. You guys had maybe 4 vendors, and you chose how many?
Almost all 4.
So how does that happen? Because that's unusual. Not that I'm criticizing, I'm just interested.
Yeah, and I think for us, being in the MarTech space, we not only look at a lot of these, vendors as just vendors, but also partners. Mm-hmm. So, we use actually a handful of tools to share our open sales pipeline with some of those other, prospective partners. We can compare customer lists, and oftentimes just building that deeper partnership. Sometimes being like, hey, you guys use us. we'll use you. Therefore, we know what that better together story looks like, and we can actually, and very successfully, do have strong co-selling motions for a lot of these vendors. So, when we were out looking at ABM orchestration tools, like, there are a handful of lead players out there, and, we had some existing relationships with more or less all of them. And, not that we wanted to bring bloat into our stack intentionally, but, we are using certain vendors for certain plays. And like I said, as part of that, there's, in 2021 in the B2B SaaS world, if you're only a vendor, you're probably not doing enough. I think that there's so much, let's say thought sharing or strategy sharing, or frankly, like, if you have a more robust partner program, like, let's go to market together. Like, let's tell us how our product and our partner's product together actually solve a lot more than our two products independently. And I think when we look at bringing some vendors on board, we look holistically at not only the value it brings to our company, but also the value of a deeper partnership with that particular vendor. That may be somewhat unique to our business, but I think that's something that has worked well for us thus far, which is, again, not just looking at vendors as vendors, but looking at them as strategic partners, and saying, hey, how can we, by nature of both using our products as an assist point, how can we help ourselves, get to where we need to go?
That's fascinating. So you've touched a little bit so far on kind of a very little bit on MarTech, a little bit on kind of some of the SDR tools. Anything more that you'd like to share further down the pipe as you kind of get into the sales domain before we even get to customer success?
Yeah, so I think what's really was a changing point for us in 2020. A little bit about our business is, a lot of companies that we work with, let's rewind back to say January or February of 2020. A lot of the customers or prospects we were working with were saying, yeah, we go out to conferences, and we have a booth in a conference hall, and we build a material amount of our pipeline for the year by people coming up to us at a booth and, like, getting to know us for the first time, and probably taking a meeting from there. So there was obviously a pretty momentous shift that happened when there were no conferences anymore, and people were sitting in their living rooms, and companies and field marketers not really knowing, like, hey, what do we do next? So Sendoso and, like, gifting is a tactic, kind of came into the forefront as, again, as an experimental process to say, hey, how can we go to those folks who normally we meet in a conference halls instead of having them come to us? We have a fairly well built out sales development function. Like I said, our Scottsdale office is really our hub for our SDR team. And one thing that Ops does to, again, go after those folks that saying, hey, like, you're probably in a pinch right now, and, like, sending can help there. Ops tries to steer that SDR team as best we can by really managing our Salesforce database. So what I mean by that is, you can have every sales engagement platform out there, but if you really don't know who you're supposed to be going after and why, you have a lot of tools, but you really don't know how to go deploy them or where to go deploy them to make some real pipeline results. So a big changing point for us in 2020 was really getting tactical about how we tier up our database. And that started with, from an ops perspective, one, making sure that we have data providers that can get the right addressable market that we believe to be the right fits for us into our Salesforce instance, get those accounts enriched with contact data. So, like, hey, we know the personas we sell to. How can we make sure that those accounts are built out with those folks? And then lastly, like, running some pretty basic but very effective tiering and prioritization. So that means that not all accounts are created equal. That means that, if you're an SDR and we give you, say, 500 accounts to work and prospect, where do you start and where do you finish? So a huge tactic for us last year was getting really tactical about how we tier up our database and prioritize it. So while that's not necessarily a tool itself, it's an incredibly strong strategy that drives how we use all of our tools. So, in as many words, we had a pretty successful 2020, very fortunate to be in that position, but a lot of that comes back to those early, days in March of last year where people were panicking and said, hey, what we really need to do right now is get really focused on what are the industries and companies that we know are good fits for us. What's a really strong messaging that we can deliver that's super relevant to, what's happening outside of our companies at the moment. And again, really focus on prioritizing where our team should be spending their time. And that paid off dividends for us last year. And again, I talked about this in some other capacities, and you don't need a big ops team, or you don't need like a lot of tools to do account tiering and prioritization. It could purely be a matter of, you could buy a tool like a Clearbit or an Everstring or ZoomInfo, and you can say, hey, like, let's just know the industries that we sell to. And let's say if it's a B2B SaaS company, that's tier 1. If it's a hardware manufacturing company, that's tier 2. Right. And if it's in the manufacturing space, maybe that's tier 3, and we want to deprioritize those. So that was a huge strategy for us last year that paid off. And I think that all starts up funnel. And of course, the benefits of that cascade downward all the way through, are we signing the right customers, and are they the right customers that can, 1, retain, and 2, expand? So it was, an exercise that I would challenge every RevOps leader or every sales leader or marketing leader to go out there and make sure that you're doing that. Because if you do, of course, there's a lot of good results to come from that.
That's awesome. And did you have to make adjustments to your pricing or the way that you organize your pricing strategy in 2020 as a result?
Yeah, it probably wasn't as a direct result of what was happening in 2020, but we did learn a lot from, I think, how customers and companies were buying during that time. And we did make some iterations to our pricing in a good way. I say iterations to pricing are always a good thing, at least you hope. But we did make some changes to our pricing, and we actually paired that with rolling out a CPQ tool to help, of course, make that nice and easy in January of this year. So we've been off and running pretty strong now for 4 months and change so far in 2021. But I think the newest addition to our stack has been bringing aboard DealHub and working through a tool that helps manage pricing changes, which can always be somewhat sticky for sellers. And if you can put that clearly inside of a tool that kind of shepherds people through building out new agreements compliantly, that's been a big boost for us so far for this year.
And then beyond pricing, has there been a handshake with customer success? What have you guys been doing on that side of things? I know for many others, subscription management, renewals, etc., have been a big deal, especially when it's been tough for them to acquire new business. Given that you've given us a pretty comprehensive answer so far, I'm guessing that is not a blind spot, but you guys are doing something there too.
Yeah, so our business has a couple components to it. There's a SaaS component, and then of course, there's actually how people are using our product and what are they sending, and to whom and what values. So there's a lot of data that comes into our post-sale part of our business. So that's always been a challenge for us that we've been spending the last year or so fine-tuning. It started with, we have a data warehouse. It's more or less our product backend that we've had, some BI tools. We were able to visualize that. But that's not always like the most, let's say, end user friendly experience. Like CSMs, they're navigating data in Salesforce, looking at renewal data there. Sometimes it could be somewhat cumbersome to jump into a BI platform and try to glean more insights from those particular tools. So we're actually in the process right now of rolling out a customer success platform. We just purchased Catalyst, and we're really excited about what that's going to bring to our teams, just to bring a lot of the commercial data that we have within Salesforce, a lot of the usage data that we have that's coming off of our product backend, and putting those in one super simple, easy to use interface where they can run plays for retention, for expansion. So we're really bullish and really excited about bringing that tool aboard. And like I said, we're just kicking things off now, but we're really bullish that it's going to make a big impact for the second half of this year for us.
That's awesome. And I've been thinking as you've been sharing, in terms of the acquisition of tools and technologies, do you follow, whether whether you're aware of it or not, a pattern of, Q1 is about enablement, Q3 is about maybe execution? Do you have kind of an implicit, I look for these type of tools in these quarters, kind of following the natural financial year of each company? May not be something that you plan for, but it may just be that those are the precious targets or KPIs that you have to hit.
Yeah, and when we buy tools more or less year round, but I think there's definitely some cycles that we go through. I think about Q4 is obviously a big year, or a big part of the year for many companies. Both that's when, at least for us, that's when sales is trying to drive and close out their fiscal year. But for us as well, it's when we're looking into next year and saying, hey, where were the blind spots that we had in our stack? What's a process we need to retool for next year? And Q4 is usually when we're out looking for what what do we need to bring on board that's going to get us where we need to go next year that maybe we didn't have for this last year. I know just in this last Q4 of 2020, like we did a pretty serious market check across a handful of vendors, and we actually brought on almost all of the ones that we were looking at, around lead routing and management, data enrichment providers, CPQ. So Q4 was a big implementation period for us, largely because, of course, if we turn the page into Q1, our teams are heavy on things like sales kickoff. There's a ton of focus on enablement, lots of things focused on this is the strategy that's going to be different or new or refreshed for the next year. And all of the SKOs that I've been a part of, there's always new tool trainings and strategy shifts with existing tools. So we look pretty heavily in Q4 as a buying period. I think some of the dangers you can fall into when you're trying to buy tools year round is like there's not always your sales team, it doesn't exactly uptake learning new tools consistently throughout the year. Right. There are periods for us, like I like to say, the last month of any quarter is just kind of let the team go do their thing. We can always regroup in the first month of a new quarter. So we tend to see some more smaller cycles around beginnings of quarters, just again around the idea of kickoffs and summarizing results and retrospectives about what worked, what didn't. So we see, I see strong cycles that tend to be on that timeline. But like I said, if there's a real need, of course, we could break that and saying, hey, like there's something out there that we think is going to solve an immediate pain. And of course, that stuff tends to kind of be more ad hoc.
Okay. So I was trying to get a sense, you gave me a good sense of Q1, Q4, and maybe the wider kind of step back. Q2, what's the general mindset in Q2?
Yeah. Q2 is always, hey, we're off and running. Q1 is behind us. Oftentimes, Q1 is always an interesting carryover from, Q4. I think there's a lot of good distractions that happen in Q1. It's a lot of, hey, we had SKO, people, holidays, lots of different things. Q2 is usually like, okay, most SaaS companies have targets that increase quarter over quarter. So Q2 is when it's like, okay, we've got one quarter behind us. We have a bigger target in Q2 than we have to do in Q1. And we don't have a lot of the, let's just say, distractions to say, we're going to have a compressed quarter because we're spending a week doing SKO. So Q2 is really where it's time to start pushing the gas pedal a little bit harder, especially as you start gearing up for, ends of Q2, which can tend to be travel, people on vacation, summertime looming, schools getting out. Really just trying to understand like what's happening maybe outside of the business and understand like how your buyers are buying. And so Q2 for us is always a bit of a nose to the grindstone quarter, just to say, hey, like there's no distractions like we had in Q1. We're enabled, we're kicked off. Now it's time to go put that to use.
Very good. So Alex, is there any questions that I should have asked you today with regards to kind of enabling your tech stack? Anything that I missed in terms of you summarizing and sharing your insight, your experience?
Yeah, I think, one thing, it's probably not so much of a question, Gideon, as it is more of a commentary. And I promise you, I won't go into a long history of my background, but I like to think I started out my career in the best job you could possibly have in a go-to-market company, which is as an SDR. And through a couple funny twists and turns.
So did I.
Yeah, the best way. I guess I joke it's the best job I've ever had. But through a couple funny twists and turns, I found myself at a company where I was the SDR and the AE and the CSM and the support person. In order to effectively do that, we had to go buy tools and set them up. And we were a 15-person company, and so that was kind of my first foray getting over into ops. And it was something where it was a kind of nights and weekends project that I was working on. It's like, hey, I'm going to prospect all day and try to set up Salesforce at night. And, those were some fun early days that you get curious about saying, hey, ops is my path. But one thing I always, I'm very thankful for is there are a lot of awesome communities out there of like other RevOps professionals. I know I mentioned a little bit earlier when we're, evaluating products, like tapping into peer networks, but I can't understate that for anybody who's earlier in their ops career. You don't go to college and get a degree in RevOps and like come out like a boot camp like you're ready to go. There's no coding academies that you can go to come out with a fresh degree in RevOps certification. So a lot of learning and understanding like how do you do this job effectively is not by reading a book. It's by like listening to your peers and getting involved in communities. So I like to always, plug a couple. You always think of Modern Sales Pros, Wizard of Ops, Rev Genius, Revenue Collective, RevOps Co-op. There's a long list of them out there. So I always love to, just at least plug that, hey, if you're early in your RevOps career and you're still trying to figure out like, how does this job work? Or even if you're, later in your career and you're just trying to like talk shop with other like-minded people, there are a lot of awesome communities out there that, especially as of 2020, moved a lot of their interactions with their members into like Slack communities. So, what that's done is there are people around the globe now that are sharing their ideas. And what I love about doing this type of work is nobody is so, overly confident that they are 100% correct. So everyone's very humble about sharing, hey, here's where I tried this and it didn't go so well. And, I think I always love to pay it forward because I've learned so much from those same communities. So for anyone out there that's, still learning earlier in their career, or even middle or later in their career, just looking for new ideas, like get involved, like reach out to your communities and stay connected. And, even if you're a passive listener or observer, there's a ton of value you can get from doing that. So, that was a strange answer to your question, Gideon, but I figure one that, for anybody out there who's trying to figure this out, you're not alone.
I appreciate it, Alex. I appreciate your candid, kind of authentic response to everything that we've thrown at you today. A ton of value there. It's great to see that you're confident and bold enough to be able and willing to talk about the stack. A lot of people kind of dodge those kind of questions for whatever reason. So wishing you tons of continued success, you and the rest of the team over at Sendoso. And thank you so much from myself and all of the RevAmp team for coming on board here and sharing. And I would encourage anybody that's listening to this to just follow you on LinkedIn, ask any questions if they want to learn more from you, and reach out from there. So thanks a lot, Alex, and it's been our pleasure.
Yeah, thanks. This is great. Thanks for having me.